Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I am Kelsey Martin Harbick. I work with Mel Babick and Mitch Long at Kittitas Conservation Trust. And as Mel mentioned earlier, we are made up of a board which consists of Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Suncadia, and the Yakima Nation. So I am here to talk to you about our proposed Upper Yakima River floodplain acquisition strategy. There was some earlier effort to put together some conservation priorities for the Upper Yakima corridor, but that kind of fizzled out. So we're hoping to pick that back up and run with it. If you're not familiar with the portion of the Yakima River we are focusing on, it's that red squiggle in the middle. That is the Upper Yakima River migration zone. And if we zoom in a little closer, the darker blue is that migration zone again, and then the lighter blue shows the 100-year flood plain for the Upper Yakima River. And that is where we're going to be focusing our acquisition strategy effort. And the Upper Yakima River is important for numerous fish species at various life stages. Chinook and coho salmon, lamprey, and bull trout spawn in this reach of the Yakima River. Bull trout spawning is limited, but it has happened, so I included it. We've got juvenile rearing of all those species, as well as rainbow trout, and then migration, foraging, and overwintering for salmon, coho, and trout species. And that's not all inclusive. We've got other native fish species that are equally important to the ecosystem. They use this habitat, as well as aquatic insects, some aquatic mammals, and then of course riparian mammals and plants that are important as well. But there's also some limiting factors in this reach. So if we look at our steelhead or Yakima steelhead recovery plan, I pulled out just some of the more relevant limiting factors for this specific project focus. And those include floodplain alteration, simplification of the waterways, reduced water quality, high impact streamside recreation activities, and then obviously the one we're most focused on is impacts from development within that floodplain. And the issue with this is, I know everyone hates math, but it's simple math. Limited in-stream habitat equals limited in-stream fish numbers. And if you have low habitat diversity, you're going to have low species diversity, and low species diversity plus low fish numbers does not equal a healthy aquatic ecosystem. So what are we going to do about it? If we look to our regional recovery plans, we can get some ideas. The Yakima Steelhead Recovery Plan, action number 12, talks about the need to reduce confinement in the Upper Yakima River. And the Bull Trout Action Plan echoes that same sentiment and cites the need for floodplain acquisition and easements along the Upper Yakima River to help reduce that confinement. And then if you look at your 2025 tag focus project list for this year, number 2020 or 22, I keep saying 2022. 22, the Upper Yakima floodplain and side channel protection need via acquisition projects. So basically, that's what we want to do, is we want to help protect the Upper Yakima River corridor to allow for natural floodplain and riparian functions in the area. So by conserving land along the banks of the Yakima River and within that 100-year floodplain, then KCT can help protect those complex habitats that allow for healthy and complete aquatic ecosystems. So basically, we want to keep places that might look like this right now from turning into something that might look like this or this, where we basically have frozen the river in place and it no longer has the ability to function like a natural river. And we lose a lot of those important natural processes that can make it a healthy ecosystem. There have been some other related assessments done within our project area that I wanted to note. The largest of which was done by Mid-Columbia Fisheries, and it's the Upper Yakima River Cottonwood Assessment. And that assessment did cover a large portion of our project area. But it was heavily focused on looking at cottonwood reproduction and regeneration and restoration opportunities for cottonwood habitat. And we may be using a lot of data for that. And we also think there's a lot of room for us to expand on that with a little bit of a different lens. Also, within our project area, the Yakima River Corridor Plan looked at a smaller area kind of right above the Yakima River Canyon up to the Jeffries Levee. And they were more focusing on looking at flood risk reduction and again, restoration opportunities. But for this project, we want to look more specifically at prioritizing land acquisition opportunities that already have impact habitat and not so much focus on restoration opportunities. And then hopefully the strategy will also help streamline future funding applications when those higher priority acquisition opportunities do arise. And then, of course, we hope that this will help us ensure that while we're seeing all this rapid growth in our county, that it can happen in a way that we're still leaving room for our fish and wildlife inhabitants as well. So this is a better example of some place we'd want to make sure we kind of keep it the way it is now. So it's, I guess it's a little bright in here, so it's harder to see, but the river, there is some constriction still. You see I-90, and there are a couple of houses in here. There's like some in here, but the river still has some room to move around and do the things that the river needs to do. And if we zoom in, we can take a little bit closer look of what exactly we're protecting when we protect a place like this. So we're protecting complex habitat that enables large wood recruitment and braided channels, which provide juvenile rearing habitat and refuge from high flows. There's also a lot of functional riparian habitat, which provides habitat for wildlife as well as shading the stream or the river in the summer and keeping those water temperatures a little bit lower. And when we have complex functional natural areas like this, then the river has a natural ability to filter out contaminants more, let fine sediments settle and reduce turbidity. So it has an ability to sort of improve water quality. And of course, these complex systems are more resilient to climate change as well. And in addition to all of our ecological benefits, there's community benefits as well. When you have connected floodplains, you have better flood conveyance, which can reduce velocities and potential erosion risk for downstream residents. We also will be conserving land that is within the Yakima Nation ceded territory and will provide more open space for traditional tribal uses. And we allow for low impact public access on our conserved lands, and as an economic benefit for Kittitas County, Kittitas Conservation Trust does pay taxes on our conserved lands. So just to touch back on all those limiting factors we looked at from the Steelhead Recovery Plan and how we want to address them, we want to protect floodplains that are still intact, and we want to protect complex habitat that still exists. And hopefully that will help improve water quality and reduce those more high impact recreational activities in the floodplain. And then of course, reduce increased development within the 100-year floodplain. So if we were to be funded for this project, we would want to try to hit the ground running in October of this year with spending some time to really find the right GIS consultant to help us build this tool that we want to build. And then hopefully would have somebody contracted by January of 2026. And then starting in February through March, we'd be working to put together a really robust technical advisory group. And then working really closely with that technical advisory group, with our partners, and with our GIS consultant for the rest of 2026 to put together, basically build our model and figure out what data inputs need to be included to build this prioritization strategy. And then once we get that figured out, try to find all the data we need and coordinate with our partners to get that data and compile it so it can be put into a model. After that, starting in 2027, KCT staff will be working with our consultant to actually build that tool and fine tune it. And then after that, we're gonna have our consultant train KCT staff so that we know how to use it. We know how to update it in the event that we have new data to include. And my big hope is that it will be something that is also shareable. So if we want to also prioritize floodplain conservation and acquisitions in other reaches of the Yakima Basin or tributaries of the Yakima River, then we may be able to use that same tool and just give it a different set of data, and have prioritization in other areas. So we don't have to keep rebuilding this. The biggest challenge we anticipate, we've talked to a few other agencies and tribes that have put together similar acquisition prioritization strategies, and it sounds like the most difficult thing is trying to figure out what data inputs to actually include. It sounds like it's a slippery slope to want to add everything in, and then you end up with this big clunky thing, and it's hard to interpret and not necessarily as functional as you hope. So there seems to be a sweet spot where you get, you know, the most important inputs, and then you get valuable output. So that's gonna take some effort on our part and all of our partners, hopefully, to figure that out. Once that's done, we'll have to find all the data and compile it. That will also take some time and some effort. But after that, it should be easy. We're not the first ones doing this. Our goal is to find a consultant that has done similar strategies before. So that shouldn't be too difficult, I'm hoping. And just a quick overview of our budget. The two biggest components are staff time and obviously the cost for the GIS consultant. As I mentioned, I think there will be a pretty heavy investment for our own KCT staff to work at making sure we have the right inputs, working with our partners, working with our technical advisory group participants, and just making sure that we're building a tool that's going to be useful through time, hopefully space, maybe to some extent. And then for our estimate on actually building the tool, that we talked to a few different GIS consultants that had done similar work. We had a really large range, so we kind of picked the top of that just to be safe, but we're hopeful that we would get a lower bid than that. And we also included some time for mid-Columbia fisheries, since the cottonwood assessment is included in most of our project area, and that may be a big data source for us and may take time for them to coordinate data with us. And with that, thank you all for listening. Any questions?
Y'all are making it easy on me. I don't need to give time at it or anything. Efficient. Yeah, questions?
And this is different from the usual proposals that I've seen here. So I'm not sure I fully understand. Is the goal to develop a computer program so that it can be used to identify areas of land that make the most sense to purchase?
Yes,
Thank you. I missed
Yeah.
that.
sorry, if that was not clear. It should have been.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, basically, it's there's a lot of question marks to start out because we are gonna be asking for advice from all of our partners in the basin, to figure out, I mean, we'll probably include metrics like if there are other conserved lands close by, that might make one area more valuable to purchase. If it has really, obviously, the quality of the habitat located in an area would increase its priority level. If it has side channels, things like that. If it's a spawning reach. But there's a lot of different metrics that could be included, and those are gonna be all the hard questions that we have to answer in designing the tool. But yeah, the hope is to build an algorithm that you can just put in your data sets, and then it's gonna basically spit out a map output that'll show different priority levels for all these different areas along that upper Yakima.
So the input is just data about all the land along the river. And then that program helps you select which fits your criteria best.
Right. Pretty much.
Thank you.
Just in past experience, I wouldn't focus on it, and the algorithm tells you what to do.
Right,
The GIS tool and the mapping is something that working with your twig is gonna inform the discussion about setting priorities. And you guys will figure out how you do that, but I really hope that at least a critical step of that is gonna be vetting and ground truthing the priorities with key partners of the basin, so that, and not just an algorithmic score. Just because that's what will give you the support for then using it for the acquisition, so. It's just a fair question.
I realize KCT is focused on Kittitas, understand. Is there any reason why this couldn't be applied to the whole Yakima watershed, or?
that's the hope. I mean, to be fair, the lower Yakima River is kind of a different beast, and there may be some different priorities down there than we have up here. So it may not be that transferable, but my hope is that, I mean, upper Yakima River is similar enough to maybe the Natchez or the Tianaway that we could then expand into those other areas.
What would the basis of delineation be? Would you be at like a layer with tax parcel information? Because you could end up with, the whole region being,
Priority.
yeah,
That's one thing we'll have to figure out, from talking with other folks that have done similar things. I think maybe, maybe not quite down to the tax parcel. I mean, it may obviously at some point would need to get to that point. If you are looking to buy a single tax parcel, you would want to know how that maybe ranks with the strategy. But we also don't want individual landowners necessarily to feel like, oh yeah, we're targeting your land and we want it, we're gonna take it. So there's probably like a happy spot where, if this area is like similar habitat and it's got one remnant old side channel that runs through like this whole area, then maybe that area is plugged to have a single priority. But that's one of the big questions that we're gonna have to answer for sure.
so if I could play devil's advocate for a second, let's say you have a scenario where you have a great piece that's already in conservation upstream and downstream, and then there's a possibility to connect the two, but then there's a single parcel that may or may not be, just like a single house or, have something that falls outside of the metrics that you're trying to develop. but if you had that piece, then you could basically connect a much larger piece. At that, so it's not so much a question, but, you know, kind of one of those things to keep in mind, I suppose.
Yeah,
Because it may not fit, you know, any set of metrics, but from the overall scheme of things, if you don't have that, it's like the linchpin or the keystone
Right.
for the whole entire geographic area.
yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to what Alex was saying is making sure that you don't like pigeonhole yourself into, okay, no, this is our strategy, this is the number that it got, like, this doesn't have a high enough number. So we want to make sure that it's kind of a dynamic tool and we're using it in concert with other things. It's one tool in our toolbox, a really important tool in our toolbox. But yeah, we need to make sure that we have room for our own personal insight as well. If a property does have different value that may not be accounted for in the strategy itself.
Can I add to that really quick, Kelsey? That was a great explanation. Yeah, like she said, it's kind of a tool that we can assess potentials that come to us because, gosh, we want to conserve everything, right? But some areas, maybe when an opportunity arises, isn't really a priority. So it helps us kind of gauge our own selves, like, hey, let's look at this a little bit clearer. And also, we've seen other successes with Snohomish and Snohomish. They're able to ask for RCO funds ahead of time because they have this strategy. So they build a little nest egg that when a property does become available, they're ready to jump on it. Where right now, we're kind of 4 years out. When a willing landowner comes to us, it's okay, I hope you're patient because it's gonna take a while. But many times they are.
Just a few quick thoughts. One, it's not just that what you're saying is something we could add to the model. That can be data in your model. That's where if a twig says, let's find a way to rate areas by the potential to enable restoration. So, you know, you were saying focus on intact areas, but if you have a less intact area, but it's the key to a dike setback that is a high priority, that kinds of enables restoration should be right in the model. So likewise, you know, it's how well protected things are by current regulation is going to be a huge part of a discussion like this. So you showed elk flats as sort of, we don't want this to turn into that. You can't build elk flats anymore. It was built under different laws. Some places, the protections are pretty good. It might be beautiful habitat, but it's really hard to develop. Other places like Legacy subdivision, it's a lot easier. And so those kinds of things where you say, these are both high priorities, but these are the risk factors that rise something else. And it will have to get to the parcel level, both, you know, every model I've seen like this, one of the criteria is the size of the parcel. If you can do one transaction and pick up significant amounts of, it's way more efficient than 5 transactions, even at the same cost, things like. But the other thing is an assessment for surfboard is going to require that at the end of it, you do have a short list of your next set of projects, and that sets you up for a grant for us to get these. So you will need to, you don't want to go to parcel level on everything to scare landowners, but you will want to get this to the point where you meet the conceptual design deliverable of an assessment, in which case, in this case would be, here are some parcels we'd really like to work with, maybe talk to the landowners, ideally that you've done that before you go publicize it. But the idea that this isn't just creating a tool, it's also giving your first short list of what you're going to go chase next. And that's just part of how the surfboard assessments work. You assess it, but you also have to present a design for your next step.
So that kind of to be fair, what I was actually thinking of was your presentation where you have the upstream house and the downstream house. And picking those two parcels up, even though one of those parcels may not necessarily fit, but it does allow them for the removal of the levee or something like that without, so that's where I was thinking that.
You indicated this has been done elsewhere in this state?
Yeah, the Stillaguamish tribe has an acquisition strategy that they put together. I think theirs was pretty broad, and they also included prioritizing conserving agricultural land as well. The Skycomish and the Snohomish tribes, I think, have also done it, and we've reached out and talked to them about their experiences building their strategy as well. And we did ask if their tool was something that we could just get and adapt for our area. And they didn't really have a good answer, or feel like that was an easy thing to do. So I think the difference that we want to do here is try to create something that will be shareable. And not, obviously not across the world and across all different priorities, because if another area did want to prioritize conserving agriculture land, that's not something that we plan to include in ours, so it wouldn't function for that purpose. So we're looking for floodplain habitat conservation specifically.
So how far along are their programs? I mean, have they done any?
Yeah, they've completed their strategies and they've done acquisitions. And use them to apply for funding.
The Skagits may be the best example where they did their strategy probably a decade ago now. And every 2 years or so, they come to Surfboard and they basically say, hey, we picked up 3 things in our tier 1 group and we'd like this much funding for the next 3 projects. And if those don't close, here are the backup projects off our strategy. And so it means they've been able to, as you said, apply. You have to have specific projects in a list when you apply, but you have a ton more flexibility to move money and to keep on moving down a list, and a lot more certainty that if you get a landowner that comes in, you can either fund them out of your current grant if they're a high priority, or you can roll them right into the next grant you do. Whereas now it's like you have to make the case from scratch with every application.
Yeah, I know you said the adaptability potentially to the Lower River and the piece that it is, but Mid-Columbia is working on a riparian prioritization model in GIS right now internally. To kind of just like figure out where to go down in the Lower River to target like floodplain enhancement. And it's a way simpler model than acquisitions, but it could be helpful potentially with Stephen and myself's time.
We've got Mid-Columbia time in our
I-
budget, so we're gonna work with you.
Yeah, I was just saying like, for like, because I had the same concern when it came to like parcel level. You could build the model where that could just be applied after
Right.
you have a prioritization in an area, you're like, okay, what's the parcels in that area? And then you take that finer scale to it, you kind of weed out, especially when dealing with huge reaches, 80 miles, you could kind of whittle that down to 5 strategic miles and be like, okay, what parcel owners are there? And then you come up with that list. It's not too hard on that.
Did Mid-Columbia have to go through a $100,000 programming budget to develop the ability to do this?
So there's a lot of, on the back end of GIS, it is a lot to learn on the modeling aspect, luckily, like. Internally, we had some capabilities there and we still aren't finished with that. There's a bunch of things that'll need to be ironed out. But it wasn't proposed as a tool, it was a way for us to prioritize the mini projects when we seek funding, getting. Kind of trying to lift projects in the Lower River for riparian is notoriously been tough. So it's a way for us to strategically bring that to the table and be like, out of 80 miles, here's where we'd have the most uplift for cottonwoods. So it is a lot of staff and there's a lot of learning on the fly on all the projects cumulatively through time.
I did, that was one of my questions. I talked to the GIS consultant, was like, is this something that I could like be taught myself so that I could do it and then I could keep, maintaining it or maybe adjusting it over time? And it sounded like Zach said, it's a pretty heavy time investment to learn the back end of GIS. It's not just clicking the buttons, it's learning code and a lot more in-depth. And so that's not capacity that we have in-house.
All right, it's probably pie in the sky, but I was wondering about approaching the geography program at Science or something like this. Being able to bring in the community and the university, and it just seems like a really cool project to work on. and they have some good capabilities there. We've been working with them on the I-90 project for monitoring and research for decade plus, and have worked with their computer comp sci programs as well. So if that was a possibility, it might be something worth looking into.
I'll definitely be willing to entertain that idea for sure.
We've tried to contract them before for some work and it didn't ever pan out. I know people come and go and maybe there's better interest, but we've definitely tried to engage potential in some GIS work previously. But we should talk offline though. So if you're having success, maybe we could see, this is a pretty big scope that I don't know if students would have the capability for, but with an advisor leading the way, perhaps.
Any other questions? Anything anyone would like to see or hear more about at site tours? Or that's actually a question I had. That's right. Yeah, are we, we're just,
Yeah, we're gonna need a week.
yeah. That was just default. Were y'all imagining a virtual site tour or this being it pretty much? Do you have an answer at this time?
Well, I mean, what we could do, because Hutchinson, while we're out there, that could be an example of, gosh, this would be a perfect place to do a strategic model of such. So we could compare handouts and do a little on the site, if something's already been observed, but it would be an example
Yeah.
of a property that would fit this acquisition strategy with handouts. Or we could do a site presentation.
Do you think this exhibit garage would be willing to kind of demo some of the outputs of their stuff? Right?
That might be cool. There's a webinar we can send out too. This was an example. I learned about it in Floodplains by Design. They had a lunch and learn series on this, where we kind of got the driving tour of their model. So I can share that as well. If you want to look at offline.
Well, and we can send links to their, like, their outputs. They've got like some maps that just show like different colors of their different priorities. And just to kind of give you an idea of what a product might look like. And then they have like, you know, it would be, we would have hopefully some sort of map output, but then there's also gonna be a full report. And like Alex was talking about, it would pull out our priorities and expand on them and basically have like a more detailed list of priority areas.
I thought, would it ever work to pick an overlook, I'm thinking, up on Highway 10, looking over the focus somewhere where you can see a range of different places and have a discussion on site of here are the kinds of criteria we're proposing or that people want to talk about. I'm just trying to think where could you see a mix of developed and undeveloped, active and inactive, different conditions.
Or we
That's
could
it.
charter like a helicopter. Helicopters?
That's on your budget, not ours.
Want to get that release of liability out there.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
somewhere
I
that
think we're
where
done.
you could sort of see it spread out before you say, how would you pick? And just let each person say, well, what about this? What about that? Just a thought.
Some good ideas.
Yeah, so I was sort of in the same boat, like I'd love to see a demonstration of a tool. Or have a presentation on someone else's tool. You know, that to get an idea of how it works, learn more about it, so. I think that's the same kind of.
So this probably is for Alex. Most of the stuff is a citizen committee. We're looking at project, you know, in this part of the river. And, you know, how does this project affect agriculture interests, you know, so when you look at our rating sheet. Because this isn't really, this is kind of a, I don't know, has this happened before? Is this, I don't know, I'm not aware of this kind of, request. How does that fit in? How do we compare it to, you know, Frogsman, right? You know, I mean, something, you know.
It's challenging. We have done it before. One example would be that Mid-Columbia riparian assessment is funded through certain water. So in that case, it was a slightly smaller reach. It was basically for the ringer. So they talked about why it was valuable and they talked generally about what kinds of riparian opportunities are we looking for in this region? Why would those benefit fish? It's a more generic discussion. So you guys are gonna have to balance, you know, that against a much more specific discussion about this Myla Creek right here. But we've done it. And this is also part of why, back to the same theme, our process isn't an algorithm. Your score isn't the end of the day, and this is exactly the kind of thing that might come up in the, and are there projects that you feel for one reason or another should be ranked higher or lower based on criteria that the scoring model didn't capture? And yeah, it would surprise me for this one to be one of those.
Yeah, because it's, yeah, all right, good. I was curious about.
Any other questions?
One thing I'd be interested to see in your final presentation would be your anticipated costs for maintaining the tool over time, feeding it data over time, and where that money comes from. I don't think it's included in your proposed budget for developing the tool,
Mhm.
but I'm thinking that maybe some significant ongoing expenses and keeping it through that.
Yeah, I mean, so we do have a small amount of funding for overhead costs. And if we're doing maintenance on something like that, that's more of like a development of future projects, which we use KPT funding, our own funding for. So we wouldn't be looking, at least not from support, we would not be looking for ongoing funding to maintain it at this time. That's the hope anyway. And maybe if I can't figure it out and we have to hire somebody to like fix it in the future, that's not.
And Bob, perhaps a really good partnership with Alex's shop, maybe, because we want this to be a usable tool for everyone, not just for our own prioritization, but maybe it could live somewhere more generic. And we can work with a partnership with you guys on maintaining it and updating it.
Definitely possible, and there's a need for more discussion on how we coordinate GIS data storage and whatnot, so it's not just one-off analysis. Most of these aren't tools like you're thinking about writing a software app that then just needs maintenance or servers and whatnot. It's an analysis method, it's a model that you use and that you can rerun on occasion. And yeah, without going into detail, but that'd be a great discussion at the basin level on a lot of ways, you know, looking, how can we more centrally serve GIS data instead of passing around lots of floppy disks of old data and wondering what happens to it.
Yeah,
Okay, oh, thumb drive.
The biggest power to the tool is actually the GIS.
I think so.
It's like the data cleaning that goes into it, like you think of whatever's fed into it. The continuous data that is just the various layers. Could just be a rem of the entire reach. That then you're like, okay, let's do tax parcels on top of it. That doesn't really need to be cleaned through time. That's like there, so you'd have that for the reach and that whole migration corridor forever. It's just somebody plug and playing the tools of prioritization via the tag or whoever's making those decision changes. You just go change some ones and zeros, and the model gives you a different output of your new prioritization. So there's not, like, after you learn how to use the model and have the data, it's kind of plug and play. And again, I imagine the back end, that'd be the dream of it.
So would a field trip for this be a demonstration of somebody else's, someone else who has that kind of tool? Could they come and show us what they do with it? I don't know if there is anything like that, or if you know
You
anybody.
mean like on a computer
Oh, you know,
show it?
on a screen.
or,
I mean, it'd be just like.
I mean, you're not like, I don't know that there's something to watch. It's not like you're gonna watch things happening. You would just like,
Oh, okay.
it's a, you know, a process of putting things, various layers into your GIS and writing that code and telling it to run it, and then it loads for a moment, and then it creates tables and new layers for you. I think the best we could do is probably just put together some material with examples of other agencies' plans, so we can show you what that output looks like.
Yeah. I'm not a computer person, and you never get me, but.
And Jay, they can show you their model where it kind of has different colors of prioritization.
I mean, there should be some sort of visual, like, here's what they got, and here's what it looks like, and how it's kind of. I don't,
We can invite them.
yeah, get someone else to show us if they do with their markets.
Great idea.
We have been joined by Trevor, Joel, and Sean. Welcome. And Sean had a question in chat. Why is this project scoped for the upper Yakima instead of a broader area, which we've like kind of answered. Do you feel like that has been addressed and you could check out the recording, or would you like to expand on it?
Well, I mean, just a quick answer. We're Kittitas Conservation Trust and our range for acquisition is within Kittitas County. So we kind of selected an area that's within our focus range. But as we discussed during the presentation, the goal is to be able to expand it. And once this tool is built, we can give it different data and have it prioritize acquisition in the TNOA or in the Natchez or the Tieton, or further down in the Yakima River. As long as we're looking to prioritize the same things.
And part of what I would emphasize is, it's not just building the tool, it's a conversation, building the tool. So it's what's a natural group of people to have those conversations and understand restoration potential, et cetera. And if you're scoping for the upper Yakima, you're pulling together a group that really knows that ground. Whether you could scope a group for the whole basin that knew what could have that conversation, if that's an open question, but I do think that there's part of the logic is just getting the right group of people that can interact with the data.
Maybe this is the vision, and I'm just slow and pick on the uptake, but trying to broaden it out a little bit to the entire Yakima Basin and being able to share the results so others can, strike while the iron is hot. It won't always be KCP that is the one that is in the best place to do it. And if you're able to, take that handout and then give it to whoever needs it, I feel like that all of a sudden becomes a much bigger tool for the whole basin.
And as part of being a SRF, if we were to be funded by SRF board, then all of that whole tool that we built and our report with the priority actions would all be public for anyone to go look at and reference if they're seeking funding for acquisition.
And again, I can see where that partnership with Yakima Basin Fishing Wildlife, maybe they're the hub for things. I need to expand this effort in other areas. That could be.
I mean, there's a lot of discussion, a lot depends on who's doing acquisition work. And, right now in the Natchez zone, it's really limited to Yakima County, and they are driven but much more specifically by the flood hazard management planning process, which has a ton of overlap. And in the lower Yakima, there's not a ton other than Sunnyside Wildlife Area and some that Yakima Basin working the Floodplain Beach, where they've got there. So there's definitely a logic for the whole thing, and the other logical partners are like the Lands Committee and the Integrated Plan, depending where they go with their conservation goals next. There's a discussion to be had at a basin level on how we can keep this going. That may or may not be this proposal. But I definitely think this helps start a ball rolling.
Maybe someday, not even just floodplains. Not for surfboard funding though. For shrub step, that's important too.
The wildlife and the fish and wildlife are everywhere.
Yeah.
All right, we've actually caught up to time, so it's now 3. Thank you, Kelsey.